What are some of the issues in our chaotic U.S. healthcare system, among other topics?
Well, do we call it chaotic? I mean, it's highly focused on one thing, making money. And everybody in the system wants to make money. They're all directed towards that, rather than perhaps towards making patients healthier.
Welcome back to the Only Healthcare Podcast. Today we're diving into one of the most pressing topics in healthcare right now, the GLP-1s. From Ozempic to Mounjaro, these drugs are making headlines for their impact on weight loss, diabetes, and healthcare spending. We're honored today to welcome our guest, Deb Williams, as a leading voice in healthcare strategy and policy to help us explore the cost pressures, the policy challenges, and the real-world impact of these medications. Welcome, Deb.
Oh, thank you very much for having me today. I'm delighted to talk about this topic, which I think sort of like highlights what's completely wrong about healthcare pharmaceutical use and the incentives in healthcare. I've had a long history in healthcare. I worked for the Ways and Means Committee doing 3 big bills during the Medicare Modernization Act, which passed Part D, and 2 other bills, and then spent a lot of time working for 3 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world on public policy. Today, I'm just writing and spending my time analyzing issues and providing strategy and information to companies. So let's talk a little bit about the issue today, and we can really kind of dig down on what's really wrong and what's driving the huge increase in spending.
So thanks again for being with us today, Deb. And we want to start out, as you suggested, with let's get a general understanding of what are we really looking at with the GLP-1 category in particular as an example of what's been happening in the U.S. So what are some of the high-level observations that you have on that and the cost pressures that we're beginning to see?
Okay. First, let's talk about a little bit about why is there an interest and why are doctors and patients pressing to use this product, which is the GLP-1s first create a feeling of fullness and satiety, the way they work inside your body. And so that's why you lose weight. They also help with insulin control. They're one of the 4 classes of drugs that are used for diabetes after second-line diabetes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because I have some questions that I think are unanswered, which is why are we using more of these high-cost drugs in this category rather than the low-cost drugs? So essentially, the data show that between 2021 and 2023, we had a 442% increase in scripts for these products for all indications. Again, these drugs are indicated for diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular. There just was an approval for sleep apnea. Essentially, they have 2 groups of would you call it, formulations. If you take, for example, Ozempic, Ozempic, can I quote that, or is that copyrighted? Ozempic, it to Wegovy to the oral are different strengths of the same product. That creates what they call in pharmaceutical terms lifestyle planning, which we can think about from the manufacturer terms or the employer terms, higher costs. You get a drug out, you change it and modify it, get different indications, you charge more. In this class, we talked about it being a large class. There's 4 classes, DPP-4s. There's a class whose name I cannot pronounce, the sulfonylureas, they're basal insulin, and then the GLP-2s. You know, I think that one of the things that's very interesting is there's some trials going on now that are looking at how effective these drugs are compared to others in the class. And the first example that we're going to give about the problems in our system is how long it takes real-world data to get here. So Ozempic took about at least 5 years out to get for the GRADE trial for us to know, for instance, that all these products in these classes have similar effectiveness for diabetes. But again, Ozempic, advertising changes how people feel about products because they have bounded information on their choices. They're, in fact, would you call it irrational or would you call it a lack of information?
I would like to take a step back because I think that I actually think, because I was in diabetes for 20 something years, and on Avandia, the Avandia days, and the struggle was patients maintaining their therapy, because when you have type 2 diabetes, there's really not a sensation or a feeling like if you had pain, right? When you take a pain med and then you feel better. Diabetes, it's your lifestyle, and it was always around the biggest challenges providers had was, okay, I can give you this pill, the metformin, the sulfonylurea, the Avandia, whatever, but you got to exercise, you've got to diet, and they weren't doing those things, right? So they thought, okay, I've got my Lipitor, so I'm not going to have a heart attack. I'm taking my metformin and Avandia so I can maintain my hemoglobin A1C, but there wasn't anything that the lifestyle piece was very difficult for people to do, right? So I guess the question is, it's sort of like a conundrum. To your point, it's advertising, and it's people are seeing people lose weight, and that's like a lifestyle thing. But the people who have diabetes are improving their diabetes because they're losing the weight. So how do you manage a consumer challenge like you're talking about that's driving expense to the employer or the patient, but also seeing the outcomes that are happening?
So let me back it up just a little bit here, because I think your earlier point about all the different indications, what's going on, there's a lot of regulatory issues that overlap with the utilization issues that we're talking about, and then the cost that follows. So if we look at comparing what we see with the GLP-1 category, just that one category out of the four that we were talking about, that market size is 3 times larger than cancer. So if you're a patient and you're thinking about, oh, cancer's so expensive, so on and so forth, we're spending 3 times more than that in this one particular category, not only because it's used for diabetes, but it's also now going to be available for multiple indications. And so getting back to your data issue, the data that we do have, as Michael was pointing out, and you were discussing, is all around diabetes for the most part, as the other studies were going on. So there's a tremendous lag in terms of information around, well, what's really working? Is there a difference between these different products? And at the same time, we're transitioning from more of an injectable scenario, which you have today, to orals. So now you have 2 different types of formulations. It's going to be even easier to take something like a pill going forward that may not only deal with diabetes, but deal with heart disease and so on and so forth. So from a population perspective, we're looking at a huge chunk of the U.S. population that's going to be affected by what we're talking about here. And then secondly, the costs associated far outstrip what we're used to thinking about in another area like cancer. So that's why we're talking about this. And Michael's last point about the patient engagement and looking at it from a lifestyle perspective, which you were alluding to as well. So you're taking this drug, but you also should be doing all these other things. And this drug is not intended to be for life, is the other part of this. Everybody thinks it is. Well, in some cases it may be, but those are the outliers. So a lot of times we're looking at a short-term, 3 to 6 month, maybe a year on the drug. Then you go into a maintenance mode. But you still need to be doing the exercise, the nutrition, all the other things on a preventative basis. So
the challenge with that, those people, it is. I don't have the studies, so we'd have to look at them. But anecdotally, I'm hearing that patients are gaining the weight back twice as fast. If they're
twice as fast and they might be in poor health, which we really don't know because of the loss of muscle mass. And that's what both RFK and Marty Makary, the new FDA commissioner, have pointed to their concerns, which is if you take a product, you go off of it and let's talk a little bit about affordability, you go off of it for whatever reason, because people don't like to take lifetime drugs. Right. Are you better off than at the end of the day than when you were when you started? And we don't know that because we don't have any data. We have some data on long-term use. But one of the things I was going to say is let's talk a little bit about coverage and affordability, because coverage is not affordability.
Correct.
So on the obesity indication, again, we talked about there's the diabetes population, which is rapidly growing for reasons maybe I don't understand. And part of it is the data, by the time physicians have sort of their protocols and patterns fixed, then the data comes, and then how do they react? But on obesity, employers, only about a third of employers cover the obesity drugs, about 67% of large employers, and 17 state employer plans, which have been getting a lot in the news about how they've been dropping
Correct. Right.
coverage because of the cost, because it's, let's say,
It's a budget buster.
It's a budget buster, essentially. And I'll have to say this, which I thought one of the most fascinating things we could talk about why this is in the ICER report, which came out in came out this month, just I think 2 weeks ago. They talk about how in April that in North Carolina, they wanted to tie lifestyle exercise to the coverage of the product. But according to North Carolina, and this is debated, either the PBMs or the manufacturers say, we don't want you to do that as part of coverage. And they said, if you do that, we won't get you rebates. Which brings me up to my other point about the fact that we talked about real world data being delayed, including on cardiovascular, because for cardiovascular, you know what? It turns out all these products are the same.
Yes.
So.
But there are companies that are doing what you just said. There are organizations that they contract with the employer. They have a full suite of services around managing the patient. The patient has to buy the drug, right? But they have to enroll in this in order to get the drug because it's tying it to the whole overall lifestyle change and impact they can make by implementing all the things they need to on the lifestyle side of it. So there are companies that are doing that to eventually get them off the drug. I don't know how effective they are. I mean, I think they're all pretty new, right?
Yeah, that's the problem.
Right.
Flight, for example. And, I have to say that couldn't we do that with a $60 generic? I hate to sound harsh, but, coming from Ways and Means, it just makes you mean. So you would say, I could do that with a $60 generic. People are less willing. That's the problem. Another part of our system. How much do we want to invest in patients who are taking a $60 generic? Well, we've got to invest a lot in them so that way they're not using the $1,400 list price product.
Yeah, they did a study, the city of Asheville did a study 20, 30 years ago on their employees, and it was all about hands-on intervention, and they didn't have these drugs back then, right? So they had to do all the different things, diet, exercise, and they had to hold each other accountable, and it's well published, and they showed huge effectiveness and 100% participation. All of them lost weight. All of them had dropped their hemoglobin A1C. All of them lowered their cardiovascular risks, right? So that it worked. But the sustainability of those, it's just, people just don't sustain that.
Well, and that's a continuing challenge, even with the GLP-1s
Right.
that we're seeing. A lot of mixed results, as you kind of alluded to earlier, in terms of sustainability and the employees, if it's an employer plan or other patients in other programs, just don't stay engaged. So we get into this whole numbers game of how successful are we? What are the reasons why we're successful? And so that's what a lot of the different plans are pointing to in terms of performance. So but we really want to cover these or not is, the bottom line is it's easy to say no. If you say no to I don't want to get into this until we really know for sure and we have the data, it's easy to say no, we're not going to cover it, and then reevaluate that coverage later.
But is it easy to say no? I would contend to you that when you look at the results, even though it's only 33% of employers, but looking at the results, it may be hard to say no in certain instances when you have, depending upon what your employer mix is. We know it's least likely, of course, you might be more willing to say no to certain populations. But for some populations, it is hard to say no to. And I also think that within the system, and Randy, you know so much more about this than I do, that when you look at the system of rebates, and these are hugely rebated drugs. What is it? Half of it, the price of the drug is rebated. So the employer over here is getting rebates based off a trend. So these drugs make that HR person look good. Their rebates are growing. They get a bonus at the end of the year, and that changes how they affect things. At the same time, So the PBM is able to deliver that to them. So the PBM wins, they're delivering more rebates, the HR person gets a bonus because they save so much money, and yet their premiums are escalating.
Well, that's the conundrum, is how far do you go? So if you're saying no, you're saying it to typically an indication. It was a different story when it was just for diabetes. Once it started adding on additional indications, and as this gets more prolific into oral dose forms instead of injectables, this issue is going to get reviewed.
But we've talked about this. My opinion on all of this is it's the PBM's fault.
No question.
Because you cannot launch a drug into the market today unless there's enough fat in it for the PBM to put it on their formularies. And that's a fact. They are the mafia, right? So to your point, I can't name who it was, but we were talking with a company last year. They're in a crowded market, let's just say, and the CEO wanted to make $200 on the drug per month. So in order to do that, he had to charge $930 a month for that drug to make $200 and to get it covered and to ensure that the patient can get it at the pharmacy. We're talking about a lot of different things, but when you narrow down what you're talking about around cost, they're the problem with the cost. So if we can eliminate the PBM, because they don't bring any value, I don't know why we pay the PBMs any money. If we eliminate the PBMs, costs are going to come down 60-70% on these drugs.
I wonder about that, and I say that because the drug companies are making, as you know, quite a bit of money on these products as well. And let's talk a little bit about international reference pricing, because we can't explain the difference about that just for the PBMs. I mean, for example, you take Germany, which probably has a GDP pretty well near ours, and certainly is that the price of the GLP-1s over there, the list price, I think it's Mounjaro's, could be, is $60. So it's so funny. I got into this argument with a economist who does a lot of work with pharma about, whether or not that other countries would give up their secret rebate information to our president. And I thought, you know what? I don't care if they give up their 60 rebates. I want $60. Why not $60? Or take Canada, where it's $153. That seems like a very reasonable price.
Yep.
I think that we have a system again where we look at real world data, we look at rebates, and then we looked at where we are paying the differential. That is and when you think about Medicare, the differential between whatever the real price is and the net price, taxpayers are paying the difference.
Correct. So, but to your point, I mean, there's two big things to your point that are factual, and one is there's no PBMs in those countries or health insurance companies. Secondary, but not primary. They're paying 60-70% income tax, so they're getting subsidies. And yes, all the drug companies do is ship it over there. There's no deals with insurance companies, right? If you get rid of the insurance companies, like I said with the PBMs, easily drop the price 60%, easily. And to your point, maybe even more. But you get rid of them, that's a huge thing, right? Now we're not a high tax country. Well, some people could argue that too, but we're not like other countries where we're paying, where everything's nationalized. So I think that the international pricing issue is really specific to the fact that we have PBMs in this country that take the money.
I don't know. I mean, a lot of those countries, even the UK has a private insurance. And if you want to live, if you have a very difficult cancer, you might want to get private insurance. Sure. Right. But, and Germany, of course, has the sickness funds. But one of the things they do have is they have really, like Ireland, take Ireland. It's the same thing for Switzerland, the same thing for Belgium. They have really preferential tax regimes. So if you are a manufacturer and you have a factory in Ireland, you're paying less than 11 or 12% in taxes, and much less if you do what's called royalty stripping. There's some ways that they can reduce the price even further. So let's say, for example, they have a drug over there that's $100, right? So they're selling in the U.S. for, let's say, $1,000. So they want to import it to the U.S. at a very high price. So that way they'll be all the tax is paid on the differential in Ireland. And that's why we were going to talk a little bit about, we hope to get to tariffs today. I'm not sure how it's going to work on GLP-1s, but the other countries, in a way, they're differential between their tax and our tax creates a system where they want to, if they can take their profits in the other country at the lower tax, it makes them better off. And they import to us, and they're importing to us according to the Fed data from the Fed data. Yeah, no, Fed data. The Fed data. The Fed data in St. Louis at with much higher escalating costs in order to make a profit. So what we're going to do is, what's going to happen when you take our $1,000 drug, when they're exporting it to us, importing it to us at $1,000, so you put a 25% tariff on it, and it might be even higher for Ireland because everybody knows that they're part of this tax scheme, and Wyden's talked about it a lot. So who's going to pay that? Are they on GLP-1s? And I'd be interested to hear your opinion. Are they going to raise the price 25%?
No. But there are some things that I don't have all the facts. Obviously, if we get Greenland, there won't be any taxes. I'm teasing, but no. I think that really complicates it. What you're talking about, I think there's some data mining we need to do there. But interestingly enough, where do you think the 3 largest PBMs do business?
What do you mean? Where they?
So all their business is done here, but where do you think they're located?
Oh, you mean the GPOs are located abroad?
Yeah, which is so. To your point, there's definitely some funny business going on with that, but they've all moved their operations overseas as well.
So to kind of throw it an alternative, because we could talk all day about tariffs and international pricing and all that, which is definitely a factor. We have a lot of issues within the United States, as you were just talking about, certainly with the PBMs, third parties, and so forth. But we also have a different dynamic, the U.S. being so big as a single market compared to any other market in the world, particularly any of the European countries, which are all small. But to skip past that and come back to something like compounding, which is an issue within this category as well. So compounding bypasses a lot of this third-party nonsense and rebates and all this other stuff. And I only bring it up as an example of there are other alternatives to try and deal with if there's no generics. Can you be doing compounding or doing some other alternative ways to have this product available for patients in the United States?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on the compounding legislation when I worked at the Genentech, obviously, because of Avast compounding in the eye. And it's interesting to see for me to see how it's evolved over time. At first, the first FDA policies after they changed the law were fairly flexible, mostly because everybody at the time, like Lucentis was the hot thing. They were spending $1 billion, $2 billion on it, and so why pay $1,000 for Lucentis when you could pay $30 for Avastin? But over time, they tightened up on those policies. And what you see now after, according to the law, the big GMP repackagers can compound an existing drug if it's on shortage. Now the shortages have ended, the FDA has snapped the door shut. And the question, so now they're in court. And they made a statement this last week in April that they weren't going to open the door. But we'll see what the courts say. In my own opinion, which you should take with a grain of salt, because I am not a lawyer. I don't know how the courts will feel about it. I once guessed wrong, and within a month on 2 Supreme Court cases, including one where I'd actually written the legislation. So clearly I'm not an expert. But that the FDA has gone a little too far, because the law does allow individual scripts, and for them to say that you can't prepare the product in advance to fill those individual scripts seems a bit heavy-handed. Will the court feel that way? I don't know. Yeah. But certainly compounding is a way, and if you look at, for example, the telemarketers, Weight Watchers, et cetera, they're all using compounded products that were a fraction of the manufacturing cost. Now, one of the things we were talking about before we started here today, if we want to switch the topic up a little bit, was how Lilly and Novo have reacted to this by creating their own direct sales program.
Well, I just wanted to add to what you just said before, 2 things. One is compounding seems to be going away because the shortage has caught up. So there's a all of the compounded product has been purchased and is now being distributed and will probably be distributed through the end of the year, and that's going to be it from as we sit here right now. The other thing is no employer is taking on a compounded drug. They're not paying for compounding. So that's going to be fully on the patient. They're not taking that liability. The other thing is it's completely, legally they could do it, but it's also you're completely taking their patent and making a patented product and putting it in the market. So that's the issue with the compound. And then one more thing before the Lilly Direct. There's a drug that's $63 that nobody pays for because there's no rebates. It's called Brenzavvy, and it's a type 2 diabetes. It competes with Jardiance, Farxiga, Januvia. Plans will not cover that drug because it's $63 and they can't make any money on it.
You know, I spent some time in preparing for our conversation today, taking a look at it. You know, you wanted to talk about what health plans and employers could do in response, and I looked at the ICER report, and they're pretty much what you'd expect of our usual, what do they call it, the usual suspects. Narrow coverage through BMI, use lifestyle management, limit duration, which will be a mistake, I think, in many ways, because it is a chronic disorder of the system, or step therapy. And so I took a look at United's policy, and I'll just out them. Why not? Sure. And I thought it was uninspiring. And I didn't know the reason you saw. I thought, well, you should hit most of these classes harder. You should start with the generic. I don't really understand why people are, if they're all the same according to the data, then how could your diabetes be uncontrolled? And so you're proceeding through the classes, which right. There are so many classes. So, but it seems to me that one of the reasons why these step therapy policies are so lame is because of what you said. But it's more than just the rebates with the PBMs. Employers like the rebates too.
Right. They're both. There's a lot of addictive behavior.
Oh, of course.
by the plans.
That's a tool they use to get the lives.
Right.
And companies love it too because it sells their products. Let's not forget that, you know.
Easy marketing.
Easy marketing.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. And I think it's also in response to the compoundings going off the market. Lilly and Novo have now introduced these direct programs, Novo Cares and Lilly Direct. And they're lowering, what they're doing is they're providing two options, right? They're providing a vial syringe option, which is what you would get if you want compounding anyway, or you're getting the pen. Pen obviously is more expensive. But being able to have the vial syringe option and going direct through these programs, they can get a direct price, which is about, from my math, a similar net price that a plan would get with a rebate, right? So it's falling in around the same.
It's a little lower, I think. And the reason why I think they can do it lower is because they don't have to pay any mandated rebates on it.
Right.
So they don't have to pay, not that they're Medicaid patients. You're eliminating the 40B contract pharmacy. Yes. So it's, save. So I don't know those companies, the best price would be the same thing as the net price. So to also saves you that money. So it allows you to offer a slight differential. We talked about how the prices are dropping.
But remember, though, those are also off-benefit claims. Those are cash claims that are not going to be on the benefit.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying. So they're cash claims. So therefore, they aren't in 340B contract pharmacy.
Right.
Not that anyone on Medicaid is paying the cash price. But I think it shows that it's our last and perhaps final example of what's wrong with the U.S. system, which everybody gets the discount and everybody has an incentive to provide high-cost drugs.
Yep.
Correct. Right. And that's something we're going to explore in another episode as well. What are some of the issues in our chaotic U.S. healthcare system? Among other topics.
Well, do we call it chaotic? I mean, it's highly focused on one thing, making money. And everybody in the system wants to make money. They're all directed towards that rather than perhaps towards making patients healthier.
Yeah, and I think the people that should make the money aren't making the money. And it's going to the wrong hands. A PBM is not inventing a new product. In fact, the PBM they're making biosimilars now and then forcing their people to go through their own biosimilar company.
Right.
And so now they own the biosimilar. You can't get another one. They won't let you take that because it's another manufacturer's.
Right. The control.
And now they're controlling what you get.
Right.
Well,
So-
I think there's a lot of money in the system for
Yeah.
a lot of people, but go ahead, Randy.
Exactly. So I want to just kind of tie this all together to wrap up our thoughts, particularly with you, Deb, around. So where are we heading with all this? Again, focusing around the GLP-1s, but what's the future look like? What do you see in your crystal ball?
Well, it's kind of interesting to me. I was very surprised when the Biden administration proposed covering Wegovy for obesity and made up a section of law, which doesn't really mean something, in order to cover it. And because they said that when I was talking internally to some of the leaders at CMS, they said they could not find a program that worked. They didn't find anything inspiring, which actually kind of surprised me. But are there programs that work for a long time? Are they sustainable? Certainly, I think this administration, if any, will be directed towards trying to find one to work. I read their turn down on the obesity drug as a final no. Other people felt like the press conference, there was more flexibility. We'll see what they come up with. If they can come up with some material, that would help probably, because they have the money to do the demonstrations, to do the trials. They have the money that they can, in fact, find perhaps some solutions that work. But I think in the meantime, employers need to take a very close look about what they're spending for the diabetes population, for diabetes products, and have better protocols directed in this.
Yeah, and I think one of those is, which I personally think would be a huge game changer, is starting out with like a genetic test, like for your pharmacogenomics, how you metabolize, because to your point, they don't all work the same on the same people all the time, right? So if you had a little bit of personal information on that patient, instead of just randomly prescribing what's available, it may give the doctor some tools and then enroll them into something a little bit more than just giving them the drug and then having a long-term solution. Like that's really where
We need physicians to have more information on what's available.
Yeah.
We need the government directed towards, I'm making an argument right now that they should keep PCORI, because PCORI is doing the Best Meds trial, which is on these products. It's the only hope we have, because no manufacturer clearly is going to fund a trial that says you could use a $60 generic instead. So we need more information. And then I really like how you pulled together to more information on the patient too.
So on behalf of Michael and myself, Deb, it was great having you here today. We probably could go on for another hour or two just talking about this particular subject. But we do have to come to a close on today's episode. And it was really fun to kind of have this opportunity to talk through some of the highlights. I will leave it at that, because we'll probably revisit this a few times over the coming months. But it was a pleasure having you here in the studio with us. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for this episode of Only Healthcare. And we look forward to seeing you again. Please follow us on all your platforms. And we'll see you next time.
Well, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Only Healthcare podcast. We hope you found today's episode insightful and informative. Remember, our mission is to provide actionable and inspirational insights on how we can improve healthcare cost, care, and accessibility for all. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and share with your friends and family. For more resources and updates, visit us at onlyhealthcarepodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what topics you'd like us to discuss in future episodes. Until next time, stay informed, and together, let's navigate the journey to better healthcare.